In 2017, a high-value Mercedes was stolen from a residential street in the West Midlands, like thousands of other vehicle thefts. But years later, that same car would resurface in a place investigators did not expect, becoming the starting point for a much larger discovery. Between February and October 2023, another pattern was unfolding hundreds of miles away. Across Hampshire, Dorset, and Wiltshire, cars were disappearing overnight from driveways while their owners slept. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in June 2023, at around 2:30 p.m, officers were already in position when a lorry arrived at Toddington Services on the M1. Information received earlier had raised concerns about the vehicle's journey, and what followed would begin to reveal the scale of an operation that extended far beyond the motorway. This is the story of a UK's biggest chop shop network operating in plain sight, a multi-county car theft ring, and a single motorway stop that uncovered a £19 million drug supply, and how police dismantled each operation piece by piece. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Monday, 1st of May. 2017 was not the start of the operation, but it would later become one of the clearest reference points for investigators trying to understand how the network worked. To the outside world, the people behind the Birmingham chop shop operation did not look like car thieves. The individuals at the center of the case were involved in the purchase, repair, and resale of vehicles obtained through legitimate salvage channels. These included cars sold as insurance write-offs through recognized salvage auctions and yards. Salvage vehicles are commonly sold after being damaged in collisions or other incidents and are legally available to buyers. The court heard that purchasing these vehicles was not, in itself, unlawful. Members of the group regularly acquired such cars and presented themselves as operating within the vehicle repair and resale market. At the center of this setup was Nadeem Arshad, who prosecutors described as playing a leading role in the operation. He was closely linked to premises used to store and process vehicle parts and was involved in coordinating how vehicles were sourced and rebuilt. Alongside him was Mohammed Nadeem, who was involved in the handling and movement of vehicles and parts within the business-facing side of the operation. Zahir Hussain was also connected to the handling of stolen vehicles and components, with evidence placing him within the wider network that supported the repair and resale process. Aman Zamir was similarly involved in handling stolen vehicles and parts. What police later uncovered was how those damaged vehicles were used as cover. Once purchased, the write-offs provided something essential: legitimate documentation. Logbooks, auction records, and sales histories gave the rebuilt cars a lawful backstory. That paperwork allowed the vehicles to pass through checks that would otherwise raise questions. Behind the scenes, however, the repairs were not being carried out with new or certified parts. Instead, components were being taken from stolen vehicles, stripped elsewhere, and fed back into the rebuild process. We will talk about the stolen cars method in a few minutes. This method allowed the group to quietly reintroduce stolen parts back into the public market, avoiding the risks associated with selling whole stolen vehicles. It also meant the crime did not end with the theft itself. What this front business concealed was a second operation running alongside it, one focused not on paperwork, but on the systematic theft of vehicles to feed the supply of parts. The vehicles feeding the Birmingham operation were not taken at random. Police later established that thefts were carried out to order based on the parts required, rather than the value of the car itself. If a specific engine, airbag system, or electronic module was needed to complete a rebuild, a matching vehicle would be sourced and stolen. This approach reduced waste and risk. Entire cars did not need to be sold on or moved long distances. Instead, only what was needed was removed, with the remainder quickly stripped or abandoned. The stolen vehicles were taken from across the West Midlands and further afield, not just Birmingham. Police linked thefts to locations including Derbyshire and other surrounding counties, indicating the group was prepared to travel to obtain the right vehicles. In some cases, owners later tracked their own stolen cars to sites connected to the network, helping police build a clearer picture of how the pipeline operated. Once a vehicle was stolen, it was moved quickly. Parts such as engines, airbags, steering wheels, dashboards, and electronic control units were removed, often within hours. These components were then fed directly into vehicles that had been bought legitimately as insurance write-offs. By separating theft from resale, the group reduced the chance of a single vehicle being traced from start to finish. Police ultimately linked the operation to 117 stolen vehicles, a figure confirmed through forensic examination, recovered parts and documentation seized during raids. But what police had not yet uncovered, however, was where this dismantling was taking place, and just how many locations were involved in keeping the operation running. As the full structure of the operation began to emerge, police started identifying physical locations that linked both sides of the network. Multiple premises across Birmingham being used to dismantle and process stolen vehicles. These were not remote or concealed locations. They were industrial units and business addresses, places where vehicle activity would not appear unusual and could continue without attracting immediate attention. Key locations were later confirmed in Digbeth, including premises on Charles Henry Street and Cheapside, as well as sites in Sparkhill, including a business unit on Grove Road. Each location served a specific purpose. Some were used to strip stolen vehicles, others to store parts, and some to carry out rebuild work on salvage cars purchased through legitimate channels. The scale became clearer as searches expanded. Officers executed warrants not just at garages, but at storage facilities linked to the group. In one operation, police searched 250 shipping containers, discovering that around 30 of them contained parts cut from stolen vehicles. Some containers held multiple engines and gearboxes, stored ready for use or onward movement within the network. What police were now seeing was no longer a loose collection of garages, but a coordinated system spread across the city. And as officers began to enter these sites, they started finding something even more concerning than the volume of stolen parts. Evidence that some of the rebuilt vehicles had already been sold back onto the road. One case highlighted in court involved a Volkswagen Golf that had been sold for just over £10,000. To any buyer, it appeared to be a repaired insurance write-off, but forensic examination later revealed shocking discovery. A specialist examiner told police that the airbags in that vehicle may not have deployed in a collision. Officers said this created a serious safety risk, as there was no way for the buyer to know whether the system would function in the event of an accident, despite having paid a legitimate price for the car. For investigators, this shifted the case beyond vehicle crime alone. It was no longer just about theft and fraud, but about the potential harm caused by cars that had been rebuilt cheaply and quietly, without regard for the people who would later rely on them. As police continued their inquiries, attention turned to how long these vehicles had been circulating, and what finally led officers to the locations where the operation could be brought to an end. For a long time, the operation remained largely invisible. What eventually disrupted that balance were not chance discoveries, but a series of small breakthroughs that began with the victims themselves. In one key moment, a victim from Derby took steps to track his stolen vehicle after it disappeared. Using tracking information, he was able to trace the car to a location in Sparkhill, Birmingham. When that information was passed to police, it provided something investigators had been missing: a direct link between a reported theft and a physical site connected to the rebuild operation. Around the same time, officers were revisiting older unresolved cases. One of them involved a Mercedes SL 400, valued at around £70,000, which had been stolen in 2017. Like many high-value vehicle thefts, it had initially gone cold. But intelligence gathered during the Sparkhill inquiries led police to search a garage in Digbeth, where that same Mercedes was eventually located. That discovery was significant. The vehicle had not been exported or written off. It had remained within the network, passing through locations linked to dismantling and repair work. With those links established, police began covert surveillance on several premises connected to the group. Officers monitored vehicle movements, tracked individuals coming and going, and built a picture of how the different locations were being used. This phase allowed police to identify who was involved, which sites were active, and when stolen vehicles were being moved. By the time warrants were prepared, investigators were confident they were dealing with a coordinated operation rather than isolated offences. The intelligence gathered from victim reports, historic thefts and surveillance work was brought together to plan a series of coordinated raids across Birmingham. What followed would expose the full physical scale of the operation and bring the people running it face to face with the evidence they could no longer explain away. When police moved in, it was done simultaneously across multiple locations in Birmingham. Warrants were executed at garages, industrial units and storage sites that had been under surveillance for weeks. Officers entered the premises wearing body-worn cameras, documenting the moment the investigation moved from intelligence gathering to enforcement. Footage later released by police showed officers entering yards and workshop units, where vehicle parts were spread across floors and workbenches. Some sites appeared active, with tools laid out and vehicles partially dismantled. At the time of the raid, several suspects attempted to flee. In one incident captured on bodycam footage, Aman Zamir ran from a yard as police entered. He was eventually caught after becoming trapped down the side of a van, unable to escape as officers closed in. Aman Zamir was later also convicted of assaulting police officers while attempting to resist arrest, an offence that was dealt with separately by the court and added to his sentence. Inside the units, officers began systematically documenting what they found. Police also recovered large quantities of loose components. Every item was photographed, catalogued, and later examined to determine whether it had originated from a stolen vehicle. With the physical operation exposed, investigators turned to the finances behind it. What police found were unexplained deposits and spending patterns that could not be accounted for through legitimate vehicle trading alone. The sums moving through some accounts were inconsistent with the declared income of those involved, reinforcing the conclusion that the dismantling and rebuilding operation was generating significant criminal profit. The case against the group was brought before Birmingham Crown Court in 2019, where prosecutors laid out the scale of the operation and the roles played by each defendant with overwhelming evidence. The judge described the operation as organised and deliberate, noting that it had been running for a significant period and involved repeated criminal activity rather than isolated incidents. The court was told the offending was sustained, structured and carried out for financial gain. Nadeem Arshad received the longest sentence. He was jailed for 7 years. Mohammed Nadeem was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for his involvement. Zahir Hussain was jailed for 4 years and 6 months. And Aman Zamir received a sentence of 5 years for operational role and 3 months for assaulting police officers. Following the prison sentences, the case returned to court for confiscation proceedings under the Proceeds of Crime Act at a hearing held at Wolverhampton Crown Court in 2020. The court ordered Nadeem Arshad to repay £114,941 after he was unable to explain a series of suspicious deposits identified across his bank accounts. Mohammed Nadeem was ordered to repay £17,543, a figure calculated following an examination of his financial records. The court also ordered Aman Zamir to repay £51,183, representing criminal benefit derived from his involvement in the operation. At the time of the hearing, no confiscation order was made against Zahir Hussain. The court confirmed that a separate proceeds of crime application relating to him was still outstanding and would be dealt with at a later date. But as police closed the books on one operation built around stolen vehicles and false legitimacy, another pattern was already forming elsewhere. Quieter, faster, and unfolding night after night while victims slept. Between February and October 2023, a coordinated theft operation unfolded across southern England, led by a small group operating out of Southampton. At the center of it were George Berry and Benjamin Cross, later identified by police as the organizers behind a sustained campaign of vehicle theft. Berry and Cross were not stealing cars opportunistically. They oversaw a structured operation that targeted vehicles to order, focusing on high-value models equipped with keyless ignition systems. They were supported by others in the group, including Bradley Paddock, who played an active role in theft and handling, and associates who assisted with transport, storage, and concealment. Over the 8-month period, the group stole 107 vehicles. The majority were taken from Hampshire, where 76 cars disappeared. A further 28 vehicles were stolen from Dorset and 3 from Wiltshire. Police later confirmed the thefts followed the same pattern across all 3 counties, linking them to the same organised crime group. The cars were taken almost exclusively from private driveways. They also placed the vehicles close to the owners' homes. An important detail, given the technology the group relied on. We will discuss this in a few minutes. Investigators later said this approach reduced risk at every stage. Quiet residential streets meant fewer witnesses. The absence of visible damage delayed reports. And by the time owners contacted police, the vehicles were already being moved away from the area. By late summer 2023, reports from different forces were being compared, and the scale of the operation became impossible to ignore. What appeared to be isolated thefts were, in fact, part of a single, organized campaign, one directed by the same individuals night after night. And while the cars were vanishing from driveways, they were not disappearing entirely. Each one was being taken somewhere specific, for a purpose that would soon become clear. Before discussing the other part of the operation, the success of the operation depended on more than timing and location. The gang exploited weaknesses in modern vehicle security, weaknesses they understood in detail and used repeatedly. Police later told the court that the group relied on signal-boosting relay devices, commonly referred to as signal boosters. These devices were used to intercept and extend the signal from a car owner's key fob inside their home. By standing close to the property, one person could capture the signal while another relayed it to the vehicle parked outside. To the car, it appeared as though the key was right beside it. Once the signal was relayed, the vehicle could be unlocked silently without any disturbance. The car behaved exactly as it would if its owner had approached it normally. Investigators said this method allowed the group to defeat factory security systems in seconds. In some cases, the group went further. Police found evidence that signal jammers were also used. These devices prevented cars from locking in the first place when owners pressed their key fobs. The owner believed the car was secure, but in reality, it remained unlocked. This two-stage approach reduced risk. Rather than stealing the car immediately, in short, the group treated the devices as standard tools of the trade. They were portable, easy to replace, and left little physical evidence behind. Combined with the quiet nature of the thefts, this made the crimes difficult to detect in real time. But while the technology allowed cars to be taken cleanly, it did not explain what happened next. One designed to move cars quickly and keep them out of sight. Theft was only the first step. What mattered was where the car went next and how quickly it could be broken down. Soon after, stolen vehicles were funneled out of the counties where they were taken and transported to a chop shop operation in Surrey. This site was operated by a separate organised crime group working further along the criminal supply chain. We will specifically cover this Surrey chop shop in some other video. The court heard that this separation was deliberate. By keeping theft and dismantling in different hands, each group reduced its exposure if police began asking questions. Their cars were stripped just like we discussed in earlier cases. The focus was on high-end vehicles, particularly those with parts that could be reused or sold on easily. The makes most frequently targeted included Range Rover, Bentley, Mercedes, Audi, and Jaguar. These brands shared two things in common: strong demand for replacement parts and widespread use of keyless entry systems that had already been exploited at the theft stage. Most importantly, parts could be moved independently, sold on, or reused without attracting the same level of scrutiny as a whole vehicle. But stripping the vehicles was only part of the process. Once the components were removed, they still needed somewhere to go, and someone ready to receive them. That final step would reveal just how coordinated the wider network had become. While the thefts were planned with precision, their impact was anything but clinical. Behind every vehicle taken was a person left to deal with the consequences, and in many cases, those consequences went far beyond the loss of a car. In one case, highlighted during proceedings, a van stolen from a Hampshire driveway was later found dumped at Western Shore, near Southampton. By the time it was recovered, the wiring had been ripped out and the vehicle was unusable. The owner told investigators he had only recently finished paying for the van, which he used daily for work and to help family members. Its loss left him without transport and without the means to continue working as normal. Another victim, a tradesman whose van was taken while he slept, described how the theft cost him more than £40,000. Around £10,000 worth of tools were stolen along with the vehicle, forcing him to stop working altogether. The loss of income that followed meant missed contracts, cancelled jobs, and months of financial uncertainty. He told the court that rebuilding his business had been far harder than replacing the van itself. Victim impact statements read out during sentencing painted a consistent picture. Several described the theft as deeply unsettling, not only because of the financial loss, but because strangers had come onto their property in the middle of the night without being detected. The court heard that these were not abstract losses, they were disruptions to daily life. And as judges weighed those statements, it became clear that the damage caused by the operation would be measured not just in stolen cars, but in the lives that were quietly thrown off course. As reports of overnight vehicle thefts mounted, it became clear that no single police force was dealing with the problem alone. The scale and spread of the offences meant the investigation quickly expanded beyond county boundaries. In total, 7 different police forces became involved, sharing intelligence and coordinating efforts to track the group responsible. The investigation was led by Hampshire Constabulary's Serious and Organised Crime Unit, with support from neighbouring forces in Dorset and Wiltshire, as well as specialist regional teams. Over the course of the inquiry, officers committed more than 12,000 hours to piecing together how the operation worked and who was behind it. A combination of investigative techniques was used to build the case. Automatic number plate recognition, ANPR data allowed officers to track vehicle movements across counties, highlighting patterns that matched reported thefts. Phone data was analysed to identify contact between members of the group and to place individuals near theft locations at key times. This digital evidence was backed up by physical surveillance, with officers monitoring suspects, vehicles and known addresses over extended periods. Each strand of evidence was tested against the others. NPR hits were matched with phone location data. Surveillance logs were compared with theft times. Over time, this allowed police to move from suspicion to certainty, showing that the same group was repeatedly involved in offences hundreds of miles apart. By the time arrests were planned, investigators had built a detailed picture of the network, who was involved, how they operated, and how the roles fitted together. The case was no longer based on individual thefts, but on a body of evidence showing a coordinated, organised crime group operating at scale. With that groundwork complete, police were ready to move. And when they did, it would bring months of covert work into the open and the people behind the operation into custody. The case against the group was brought before Southampton Crown Court, where sentencing took place across 2 separate hearings. The first hearing was held on Thursday, 9th of October 2023, with further defendants sentenced at the same court on Friday the 21st, November 2023. Presiding over both hearings was Judge Nigel Peters KC, who was told the offences formed part of a sustained and highly organised criminal enterprise rather than isolated acts. George Berry, aged 32, was sentenced to 56 months imprisonment. Benjamin Cross, aged 25, received the longest sentence and was jailed for 64 months imprisonment, along with perverting the course of justice. Judge Peters said this additional offence showed a willingness to interfere with the investigation once police attention closed in. Bradley Paddock, aged 22, was sentenced to 36 months imprisonment. Alongside them, a number of other partners and lower-level members of the organised crime group were also sentenced across the two hearings. While the court confirmed their involvement in handling criminal property and assisting the conspiracy, the exact details of their individual roles and circumstances were not set out in the available reporting. In total, 13 defendants were sentenced for their roles in the operation. Yet even as those responsible were sentenced, investigators were dealing with a very different kind of operation, one not focused on stealing cars, but on moving something far more dangerous through the UK's road network in plain sight. On a Tuesday afternoon in June 2023, at around 2:30 p.m, a lorry pulled into Toddington services on the M1, blending into the steady flow of everyday motorway traffic. Nothing about the scene appeared unusual. Drivers parked up, people moved between vehicles, and the service station carried on as normal. Moments later, a car driven by Ahmed Omar, a London-based drug dealer, pulled alongside the lorry. The driver of the lorry was Rudy Klaas, a Belgian national who had travelled to the UK from Steenokazeel, Belgium, using his haulage business as cover. The two men did not draw attention to themselves. In full daylight, with other motorists nearby, 2 boxes were removed from the trailer and placed into the boot of Omar's car. What neither man could see was that officers from the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit were already watching. Intelligence received earlier had raised concerns about the lorry's journey and its intended destination. Police have not disclosed the precise source of that intelligence, but it was sufficient for officers to position themselves in advance, allowing the exchange to take place before moving in. As soon as the handover was complete, police intervened. Both vehicles were stopped and searched at the services. Inside Omar's car, officers found 36 kilograms of cocaine tightly packed into pressed blocks. When the lorry's trailer was searched, the scale of the operation became clear. Hidden among a legitimate load of empty pharmaceutical insulation boxes, officers discovered a further 155 kilograms of cocaine, bringing the total seizure to 191 kilograms. The drugs had been deliberately concealed within packaging, normally used to transport medical samples, a method designed to avoid suspicion during cross-border haulage. The cocaine was divided into individual kilogram blocks, some of which were stamped with distinctive markings, later used by investigators to link the consignment to wider criminal networks. Police estimated the total potential street value of the drugs at £19.2 million. And as officers began tracing where the shipment had come from and where it was meant to go next, the focus shifted from the seizure itself to the people trusted to move such a quantity of drugs across borders and into the UK. As officers worked through the immediate aftermath of the seizure, the focus quickly moved beyond Toddington services. The scale of the drugs recovered pointed to something far larger than a single handover. Investigators began tracing the journey of the lorry and the people trusted to move its contents. Investigators identified both Klaas and Ahmed Omar as trusted members of an international organised crime group. Their roles were distinct but connected. Klaas was responsible for bringing the drugs into the country under the guise of legitimate freight, while Omar was positioned to receive and move consignments onward within the UK. Police said the cocaine seized at Toddington was intended for further distribution across the country rather than for local supply alone. Alongside the physical evidence, officers began examining digital material recovered during the arrests. A download of Omar's mobile phone provided critical insight into his background and level of involvement. Investigators found messages and data showing that Omar had been involved in drug dealing activity since at least 2021. The phone evidence also revealed that Omar had previously made inquiries about importing cannabis, indicating an awareness of cross-border supply methods and a willingness to engage in large-scale trafficking. This material demonstrated that the Toddington handover was not a one-off or impulsive decision, but part of a longer-term pattern of criminal activity. Taken together, the drugs had not arrived by chance, and the men arrested had not been chosen at random. What investigators were now uncovering was a supply chain that stretched well beyond a single motorway service station, one that would ultimately be exposed in court through the combined weight of physical, digital, and financial evidence. The criminal case that began at a motorway service station was brought before Luton Crown Court in 2024, where the full scale of the operation and the roles played by each man were laid out in detail. Rudy Kloss, aged 62, stood trial for his part in importing hundreds of kilograms in the UK. The judge sentenced him to 20 years imprisonment. The court was told that such a sentence reflected both the harm caused by large-scale drug trafficking and the need to deter others operating at that level. On the other hand, Ahmed Omar, aged 29 at the time of the offence and 30 at sentencing, appeared separately before the same court. Omar pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. Omar was sentenced to 8 years and 9 months in prison. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.